Father Liam Carter had sworn off the touch of women the day he buried his wife and unborn child beneath the twisted oak behind St. Mary's. 25 years of silence, prayer, and a heart wrapped in barbed wire that grew tighter with each passing season. The desert wind howled through Salvation Creek like a banshee that October night, rattling the chapel's wooden cross until it creaked like old bones. Every gust carried the scent of sage and distant rain, a promise of storms that had been building for days across the mesa. Liam knelt before the altar, his weathered hands clasped so tight the knuckles had gone white as bleached bone. At 52, his face bore the deep lines of a man who'd stared too long into the abyss of loss, furrows carved by grief, etched deeper by years of solitude. The candlelight flickered across his salt and pepper beard, casting shadows that danced like ghosts of his former life. Once, he'd been James Carter, a rancher with calloused hands and dreams of children running through fields of wildflowers. That man had died with his wife, Sarah, leaving only Father Liam, a hollow vessel filled with scripture and sorrow. "Lord, grant me strength," he whispered, the same prayer he'd uttered every night since taking his vows. The same prayer that felt more like a plea with each passing year, as if God himself had grown tired of listening to a broken man's requests. The chapel smelled of beeswax and old wood, tinged with the lingering perfume of Sunday's roses. These walls had witnessed countless ceremonies, baptisms, funerals, weddings where young couples gazed at each other with the blind faith that love could conquer all. Liam had stopped believing in such fairy tales long ago. Thunder rolled across the mesa like cannon fire, and Liam's eyes drifted to the wedding dress hanging in the corner. Ivory silk and French lace imported from back east, waiting for tomorrow's ceremony between the banker's daughter and the cattle baron's son. A union built on land deeds rather than love. But who was he to judge? Love had nearly destroyed him once, left him a shell of a man who found solace only in other people's prayers. The desert had a way of stripping men down to their essence, and Liam's essence was grief. Pure, crystallized grief that had hardened into something resembling faith over the decades. He'd become Salvation Creek's confessor, the keeper of secrets and sorrows, a man so removed from earthly desires that the townspeople sometimes forgot he'd ever been anything but their priest. The chapel door exploded open with a crash that sent the candles guttering. A woman stumbled through the threshold, her own wedding dress torn and muddied, the fine fabric hanging in tatters around her ankles. She clutched a carpet bag to her chest as if it contained her very soul. And when she looked up, Liam saw eyes the color of storm clouds, beautiful, terrified, and utterly lost. Rain dripped from her dark hair, creating small puddles on the worn wooden floor. "Father," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I need sanctuary." Liam rose slowly, his joints protesting after hours of prayer. The movement sent pins and needles shooting through his legs, a reminder that he wasn't the young man who'd once broken horses and mended fences with equal ease. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 25, with high cheekbones and skin pale as moonlight. Blood trickled from a cut on her temple, stark red against alabaster, and her hands trembled like autumn leaves caught in a winter wind. "Child, what's happened to you?" His voice carried the measured cadence of a man accustomed to hearing confessions, but something in her eyes stirred memories he'd thought buried. "My name is Ava Morgan," she said, lifting her chin with a pride that hadn't been broken despite whatever had driven her into the night. "I was supposed to marry Ethan Blake tonight, the railroad man." Liam's blood chilled like water in a January creek. Blake was known throughout the territory, a man who collected wives like he collected land grants, each one disappearing into his sprawling ranch house, never to be seen in town again. The rumors spoke of locked rooms and muffled screams, of women who'd arrived bright-eyed and left as hollow shells, if they left at all. Blake's money kept the sheriff's questions at bay and the newspaper's ink dry. "You ran," Liam said. It wasn't a question. He could read the story in her torn dress, her desperate eyes, the way she kept glancing at the door as if expecting demons to follow her through. "I ran." Her voice cracked like thin ice. "But he's coming. He'll be here, soon with his men, and when he finds me." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself in a gesture so vulnerable it made Liam's chest ache. "Father, I know what happens to women who cross Ethan Blake. I've heard the stories from the other wives, the ones who managed to whisper warnings before they stopped talking altogether. Lightning illuminated the chapel's stained glass windows, casting rainbow fragments across Ava's torn dress. In that moment, she looked like a broken angel, and something deep in Liam's chest, something he'd thought dead and buried beneath years of celibacy and scripture, stirred too. Life like a seed finding water after a long drought. The law of sanctuary, he murmured, more to himself than to her. What? It's an old tradition from the medieval times. Those who seek refuge in God's house cannot be touched by mortal hands. He stepped closer, careful to maintain proper distance. Though every instinct screamed at him to gather this broken woman in his arms and shield her from the world. But child, Blake has no respect for tradition, or God, or anything that stands between him and what he considers his property. Then what am I supposed to do? Tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks and in the candlelight. They looked like silver streams flowing down a mountainside. I can't go back. I won't. I'd rather die in this desert than spend one night in that man's bed. The wind died suddenly, leaving an eerie quiet that made every creak of the chapel's timbers sound like footsteps on a coffin lid. Liam's mind raced through possibilities like a trapped animal seeking escape. He could hide her in the rectory, but Blake would search every building in town. He could send word to the circuit judge, but justice moved slow in these parts, and Blake's influence ran deeper than desert roots. There is one way, he said finally, the words tasting like ash and desperate hope in his mouth. Tell me, marriage. If you were wed to another before Blake arrives, he'd have no legal claim. Liam's throat constricted as he spoke words that would shatter 25 years of carefully constructed solitude. I could perform the ceremony myself, but the question is, child, who would be brave enough to stand as your husband against Ethan Blake's wrath? Ava's eyes widened as understanding dawned like sunrise over the mesa, slow and then all at once. You mean, it would be in name only, Liam said quickly, his face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the candles flickering around them. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if speaking them faster might make the proposition less impossible. A protection, nothing more. We could annul it once you're safely away from here, send you to my sister in California, perhaps, or back east where Blake's reach can't follow. The chapel fell silent except for the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the desert like God's own bowling ball. Ava studied his face in the golden candlelight, and Liam felt exposed, as if she could see through 25 years of carefully constructed walls to the broken man beneath, the rancher who'd lost everything, the husband who'd failed to protect what mattered most. Her carpetbag slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sacred space. Inside, Liam glimpsed the glint of silver, a locket, perhaps, or coins saved for a new life that might now never come. You would do that? For a stranger? Her voice carried wonder and disbelief in equal measure. I've taken vows to protect the innocent. His voice was steady, but his hands shook like leaves in a storm wind. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent decades avoiding the very thing he was now proposing. Sometimes that requires unconventional methods. A horse whinnied in the distance, followed by the rhythmic thunder of hoofbeats on hard-packed earth. The sound sent ice through Liam's veins, a cold recognition that their time for deliberation had run out like sand through an hourglass. Ava's face went white as fresh snow. He's coming. Liam moved to the window with surprising speed for a man who'd spent more time on his knees than on his feet in recent years. He peered through the dusty glass, squinting into the storm-lashed darkness. 3 riders approached through the rain, their silhouettes black against the lightning-torn sky. Their leader's silver-trimmed saddle caught the intermittent flashes, and Liam recognized the arrogant set of those shoulders, the way the man sat his horse like he owned not just the animal, but the very ground it trod upon. Ethan Blake, 40 years old, handsome as the devil and twice as cruel. His black coat flapped in the wind like bat wings, and even from this distance, Liam could see the rage radiating from him like heat from a forge. The man beside him was Harper Lawson, Blake's foreman, a scarred giant who'd allegedly killed 3 men in Tombstone and never faced trial thanks to Blake's influence. The third rider remained in shadow, but the way he held his rifle suggested he was equally dangerous. "God help us," Liam whispered. "Decide now," he said, turning back to Ava with urgent intensity. "Sanctuary or marriage? Either way, once I give my word, I'll defend you with my life." The promise surprised him with its conviction. When had he last cared enough about anything to risk dying for it? Ava clutched her hands together, her knuckles white against the ivory silk of her ruined dress. Outside, Blake's voice cut through the storm like a blade dipped in honey and poison. "I know she's in there, preacher man. Send out my bride, and no one gets hurt. This is a simple matter of a woman returning to her rightful husband. We're not married yet," Ava called out, her voice stronger than Liam would have expected. Blake's laughter was like broken glass grinding underfoot. "Details, darling. We signed the contracts. Your father took my money. In every way that matters, you belong to me." His tone shifted, becoming deadly quiet. "Now come out before I lose what little patience I have left." Liam watched Ava's face transform, fear giving way to something harder, more determined. He'd seen that look before, in his wife's eyes the day she'd faced down a rattlesnake to protect their unborn child. Sarah had been fearless when it mattered, just like this woman who'd risked everything to escape a fate worse than death. "My father sold cattle, not daughters," Ava shouted back. "And I've never belonged to any man." Bold words from a woman with nowhere to run. Blake's voice was closer now. He'd dismounted and was approaching the chapel door. "You think that dried-up old priest can protect you? He's never even touched a woman, from what I hear. Probably doesn't remember what one looks like under all those holy robes." The insult hit its mark, and Liam felt 25 years of suppressed manhood surge through him like wildfire. He'd touched a woman. He'd loved one with every fiber of his being, held her as she died, kissed her cooling lips, and sworn never to feel such pain again. Blake's crude words felt like sacrilege, not just against his vows, but against Sarah's memory. "Father," Ava whispered urgently, her storm-gray eyes locked on his. "What's it to be?" Liam looked at her, really looked, and saw past the torn dress and tear-streaked face to the woman beneath. She had Sarah's courage, the same stubborn tilt to her chin that said she'd rather face hell itself than surrender her dignity. In that moment, he made a choice that would shatter his carefully ordered world. "Marry me," he said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. "Not because you have no choice, but because you deserve better than what that monster would give you." "Father, Liam," he corrected, stepping closer. "If we're to do this, call me Liam. At least until it's over." Ava searched his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then yes, Liam Carter. I'll marry you." The chapel door rattled as someone tested the latch. Blake's voice carried a new edge of impatience. "Open up, preacher, or I'll kick this door to splinters. Don't make me do something we'll both regret." Liam moved with purpose now, pulling the prayer book from the altar and flipping to the marriage ceremony with hands that had performed this ritual dozens of times. Always for other people, never dreaming he'd speak these words for himself again. "We need witnesses," he said, then caught himself. In the eyes of God and the law, his word as clergy would suffice, but tradition demanded, "I'll witness." The voice came from the shadows near the back pew, and both Liam and Ava spun toward it. A figure stepped into the candlelight, Noah Brooks, the town doctor, his silver hair disheveled and his coat dripping wet. "I was delivering a baby when the storm hit. Saw the commotion and came to help." "Noah," Liam breathed, relief flooding through him. The doctor was one of the few men in town who wasn't afraid of Blake's money or reputation. "Hurry," Noah said simply. "I can hear them discussing whether to break down the door." Liam opened the prayer book, his finger finding the familiar words. But as he looked at Ava, at this brave, desperate woman who was about to become his wife, he realized that nothing about this night would follow any script he'd ever known. "Dearly beloved," Liam began, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of sermons, but never had these ancient words felt so personal, so dangerous. The prayer book trembled in his hands as he looked into Ava's eyes, eyes that held both terror and an unexpected spark of something that might have been trust. "We are gathered here in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Outside, the wind had died to an ominous whisper, and Blake's voice carried clearly through the wooden walls. "Harper, check the back. Lawson, you stay here. If they try to run, shoot the woman in the leg. I want her alive, but I don't care if she can walk down the aisle tomorrow." Ava flinched at the casual cruelty in Blake's tone, and Liam found himself stepping closer, close enough to smell the rain in her hair and catch the faint scent of jasmine perfume beneath the dust and fear. It was the first time in 25 years he'd been this near to a woman who wasn't on her deathbed or confessing her sins. "Do you, Liam Carter," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" The words hung in the air like incense, heavy with meaning neither of them had expected to confront. Liam thought of Sarah, of the promise he'd made at her graveside to never love again, never risk the agony of loss that had nearly driven him mad with grief. But looking at Ava now, at her courage in the face of certain doom, at the way she stood straight despite her fear, he felt something crack open in his chest, like ice breaking on a spring river. "I do," he whispered, and meant it in ways that terrified him. Dr. Brooks shifted nervously near the back pew, his medical bag clutched in weathered hands. Noah had delivered half the babies in Salvation Creek, had closed the eyes of the other half when their time came. He'd seen every kind of human drama play out in this small desert town, but nothing quite like this midnight wedding performed, under threat of violence. "Do you, Ava Morgan," Liam continued, turning to face her fully, "take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Ava's lips parted, and for a moment no sound came. She was staring at Liam as if seeing him for the first time, not as Father Carter, the town's grief-stricken priest, but as a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, a man who was willing to risk everything to protect a stranger. When she'd burst through those chapel doors, she'd been fleeing one kind of imprisonment, never imagining she might be walking into something that felt dangerously like freedom. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the tears threatening to spill over. The chapel door groaned as someone threw their weight against it. Blake's patience was wearing thin, and the sound of splintering would suggested the ancient lock wouldn't hold much longer. "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Arizona," Liam said quickly, snapping the prayer book closed, "I now pronounce you man and wife." He hesitated, the final ritual hanging between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. "You may kiss the bride." The words sent a jolt through both of them. Ava's eyes widened, and Liam felt his cheeks burn. It was just a formality, he told himself, a seal on their desperate bargain, nothing more. But as he leaned toward her, as she tilted her face up to meet him, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. Their lips met in the gentlest whisper of contact, barely more than a breath shared between two souls seeking sanctuary. But in that instant, Liam felt the walls he'd built around his heart crack just a little wider. Ava tasted like rain and courage, and when she didn't pull away immediately, when her eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into him, just slightly, he remembered what it felt like to be alive instead of merely existing. The kiss lasted perhaps 3 seconds, long enough to seal their vows, brief enough to maintain propriety, eternal enough to change everything. "It is done," Dr. Brooks said solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of witness. Liam and Ava Carter, married in the eyes of God and the law. Carter. The name hit Ava like a physical blow, sweet and strange on her tongue. She was no longer Ava Morgan, the banker's daughter sold like chattel to pay her father's debts. She was Ava Carter, wife to a priest who'd risked his very soul to save her from a monster. The chapel door exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters flying across the wooden floor. Blake filled the doorway like an avenging demon, his black coat billowing in the wind, his face a mask of fury that made the storm outside seem gentle by comparison. Harper Lawson crowded behind him, hand resting on the butt of his Colt .45, while the third man, whom Ava now recognized as Zoe Harrison, one of Blake's hired guns, slipped around to block the altar's exit. Well, Blake drawled, his voice silk over steel as he took in the scene before him. "What do we have here? A midnight wedding?" How romantic. His gaze moved from Liam to Ava to the prayer book still clutched in the priest's hands. Though I'm afraid there's been a mistake. You see, this woman is already promised to me. Promised, perhaps, Liam said, surprising himself with his steady tone. But not wed. What you see before you is Ava Carter, my lawfully wedded wife, married. In the sight of God with Dr. Brooks as witness. He gestured toward Noah, who stepped forward despite the obvious danger. I can attest to the legitimacy of this union, the doctor said firmly. It was performed according to territorial law and Christian tradition. Blake's laughter was like the sound of bones breaking. Christian tradition? From a priest who just broke his vow of celibacy. He stepped closer, and Ava could smell whiskey on his breath, see the madness dancing in his pale blue eyes. Tell me, preacher man, was she worth damning your immortal soul? My soul is my own concern, Liam replied, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. As is my wife's welfare. Your wife. Blake spat the words like curse. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The contracts I've signed, the money I've invested? Ava Morgan was going to open doors for me. Railroad connections, banking partnerships, political influence. And you've stolen it all for what? A moment of lust disguised as righteousness. Ava stepped closer to Liam, her shoulder brushing his arm, and he felt her trembling despite her brave facade. The simple contact sent warmth shooting through him, a reminder that he was no longer alone in facing Blake's wrath. The question now, Blake continued, his hand moving to rest on his gun, is what I'm going to do about it. Because make no mistake, I always collect what's owed to me, one way or another. The silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope between Blake's words and whatever violence might follow. Liam could feel Ava's pulse racing where her arm pressed against his, could smell the fear mixed with her jasmine perfume, but beneath it all he sensed something else, a steely resolve that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her courage. In the first place, love. The word struck him like lightning, illuminating a truth he'd been afraid to acknowledge. Somewhere in the space between I do and their gentle kiss, between her desperate flight and his reckless vow to protect her, love had crept back into his heart like dawn breaking over the desert. Now, Ethan, Dr. Brooks said carefully, his medical training giving him experience with dangerous, unstable men. Surely we can discuss this like civilized people. The woman has made her choice. The woman, Blake snarled, made a choice that cost me $50,000 and a railroad contract that would have made me the most powerful man in the territory. His pale eyes fixed on Ava with the intensity of a hawk studying a mouse. But perhaps we can still salvage something from this disappointment. Harper Lawson shifted behind his boss, the big man's scarred face impassive, but his hand never leaving his gun. Zoe Harrison had moved to flank them from the side, her own weapon drawn but held low, casual, the stance of someone who'd killed before and expected to kill again. What are you proposing? Liam asked, though every instinct screamed at him to grab Ava and run. But there was nowhere to go, no escape route that wouldn't end with bullets in their backs. Blake smiled, and it was like watching a snake show its fangs. A trade. The lovely Mrs. Carter, forgive me, I'm still adjusting to her new name, comes with me tonight as originally planned. In exchange, I let you live, preacher man. You can tell everyone that your marriage was never consummated. Get it? Annulled. And go back to your prayers and celibacy. Everyone wins. Except Ava, Liam said quietly. Ava will learn to appreciate the finer things in life, Blake replied. My other wives did, eventually. The ones who were smart enough to stop fighting fate. The casual mention of other wives, and the implication of what had happened to those who weren't smart enough, sent ice through Liam's veins. He'd heard the whispers, the stories of women who'd entered Blake's ranch house as brides and left, as broken shells, if they left at all. I won't go, Ava said, her voice cutting through the chapel like a blade. I'd rather die here, in God's house, than spend one night as your prisoner. Blake's composure cracked slightly, revealing the monster beneath the civilized facade. You think death is the worst thing I can offer you, darling? How innocent. He gestured to Harper, who took a step forward. Perhaps we need to discuss the terms of your cooperation. Touch her and answer to me, Liam said, stepping protectively in front of Ava. The words surprised him with their vehemence. When had he last felt such fierce protectiveness? Not since Sarah, Not since he'd failed to protect the two people who'd mattered most. You. Blake laughed, but there was less humor in it now. What exactly do you plan to do, priest? Pray me to death? Quote scripture until I repent my sins. If necessary. Liam's hand moved to the heavy brass candlestick on the altar, weighing its potential as a weapon. He'd been a rancher once, had fought rustlers and wild animals, had hands that remembered how to kill when killing was necessary. But I prefer more direct methods when protecting my family. The word family hung in the air like a benediction, and Ava felt something warm, an unexpected bloom in her chest. Family. She'd never had that, not really. Her father had seen her as a commodity. Her mother had died when she was 12, and Blake saw her as property to be acquired and used. But in Liam's voice, in the protective stance of his body between her and danger, she heard something she'd never dared hope for. Someone who would fight for her not because he owned her, but because he chose to. Touching, Blake said dryly, but ultimately pointless. You see, I have something you don't, leverage. He nodded to Zoe Harrison, who reached into her coat and withdrew a folded paper. Logan Reed's mortgage on the church property, Blake announced. Seems your congregation has fallen behind on payments. The bank was willing to sell the debt to me for a very reasonable price. Liam's blood turned to ice water. The church had been struggling financially for months, the congregation dwindling as younger families moved to larger towns with better opportunities. He'd been borrowing against the property to keep the doors open, to maintain his sanctuary for lost souls like Ava. The payment's not due for another month, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, it was due yesterday, Blake corrected with obvious pleasure. I had my lawyers review the terms very carefully. One missed payment triggers full foreclosure proceedings, which means, as of right now, I own this church, this land, and everything on it. The implications crashed over Liam like a rock slide. Without the church, he had nothing. No home, no sanctuary to offer desperate souls, no purpose beyond his own grief. Blake hadn't just stolen his building. He'd stolen his identity, his reason for existing. But I'm not an unreasonable man, Blake continued smoothly. I'm willing to tear up this mortgage, sign the property back over to the church, even make a generous donation to help with future expenses. All it costs is one small favor. Ava, Liam whispered, understanding the true cruelty of the trap. Such a smart man. Yes, I want my bride back. And in exchange, your little flock keeps their spiritual home, and you keep your precious calling. Blake's smile was all teeth and malice. Though I suppose it's not really your calling anymore, is it? Hard to be a priest when you've taken a wife. The Catholic Church tends to frown on that sort of thing. The words hit like physical blows. Liam had broken his vows, shattered 25 years of faithful service in a single moment of desperate compassion. Even if they survived this night, even if Blake somehow walked away, Liam's life as a priest was over. He'd traded his calling for love, and now Blake was asking him to trade love for his calling. Don't listen to him, Ava said urgently, her hand finding his. Whatever he's offering, it's not worth the price he'll demand. Liam looked down at their joined hands, his weathered and scarred from years of manual labor before the priesthood. Hers soft but strong, unmarked by the cruelties Blake had planned for her. In that simple contact, he felt the future stretching before them. Years of quiet conversation, shared meals, gentle touches that might grow into deeper intimacy. A life neither had planned but both desperately wanted. Then he looked around the chapel, at the altar where he'd served communion to lonely widows and orphaned children, at the pews where families had gathered for comfort in their darkest hours, at the stained glass windows that cast rainbow light on moments of joy and sorrow. Alike, how could he choose between the woman he was learning to love and the calling that had saved his soul from despair? And what would Blake demand in return if he chose wrong? The weight of impossible choice pressed down on Liam's shoulders like the desert sun at noon. But as he looked into Ava's eyes, saw the fear there, yes, but also an unwavering trust that humbled him. The answer crystallized with startling clarity. Keep the mortgage, he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who'd finally found his true north after 25 years of wandering in the wilderness of grief. Blake's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. I beg your pardon. You heard me. Liam stepped forward, still shielding Ava, but no longer cowering. Keep the church, keep the land, keep whatever pieces of paper you think give you power over people's souls. But you'll never have my wife. Liam, Dr. Brooks warned from the back pew. Think about what you're saying. The church has been your life. No, Liam interrupted, his eyes never leaving Blake's face. The church was my hiding place. My excuse for not living, not feeling, not risking the pain that comes with loving someone enough to lose them. He felt Ava's hand tighten in his, felt her strength flowing into him like water into parched earth. But love isn't about avoiding loss. It's about choosing to treasure what we have while we have it. Blake's patience finally snapped like a dry branch. Enough philosophy, priest. Harper, take the woman. If the good father wants to play hero, he can do it with a bullet in his knee. The big foreman stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun, but Dr. Brooks suddenly spoke up from the shadows. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Harper. All eyes turned to the elderly physician, who had somehow produced a double-barreled shotgun from behind the back pew. The weapon looked enormous in his weathered hands, but his grip was steady as granite. Noah, Liam breathed. You think you're the only one with secrets, my friend? The doctor's voice carried a steel Liam had never heard before. I wasn't always. Just a small-town physician. Before I came to Salvation Creek, I rode with the Arizona Rangers. And before that, he smiled grimly. Well, let's just say I've killed more men than I've healed, though I've spent the last 20 years trying to balance those scales. Blake's face had gone pale, recognizing the transformation from harmless old man to deadly predator. You're bluffing. You took an oath, do no harm. That oath applies to innocent people, Noah replied calmly. And there's nothing innocent about what you do to women, Blake. I've treated 3 of your former wives, the ones who managed to escape. I know what you are. The chapel fell silent except for the drip of rainwater from the storm-damaged roof. Zoe Harrison's hand hovered near her weapon, but the shotgun's twin barrels were trained on Blake with unwavering precision. Harper Lawson looked to his boss for orders, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in dynamics. This is ridiculous, Blake snarled, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. You can't hide behind an old man forever. I have resources, connections, and I have nothing left to lose, Liam said, stepping closer to Blake with surprising boldness. You destroyed my church, my calling, my entire life as I knew it. But in doing so, you freed me from the cage I'd built around my own heart. He glanced back at Ava, saw her watching him with something that might have been love dawning in her storm-gray eyes. Sometimes God works in mysterious ways, even through devils like you. Blake's hand moved toward his gun, but Noah's voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't. At this range, the spread will take all 3 of you before you clear leather. What do you want? Blake demanded, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling to reveal the desperate, violent man beneath. Simple, Liam said. You leave. Tonight. You never come back to Salvation Creek, and you never pursue my wife. In exchange, you keep breathing. And my money? My contracts? The railroad deal that depended on marrying into the Morgan banking family. Find another banker's daughter to terrorize, Ava said coldly. The world is full of fathers willing to sell their children to men like you. Blake's face twisted with rage, but he was trapped and he knew it. 3 against 3 might have been manageable, but Noah's shotgun gave them an insurmountable advantage in the confined space of the chapel. This isn't over, he said finally, backing toward the door. I have a long memory, preacher man, and resources you can't imagine. Then you'll have plenty of time to use them somewhere else, Liam replied. Because if you ever set foot in this territory again, I'll make sure every newspaper from here to California knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Amazing how quickly railroad contracts disappear when word gets out about murdered wives and missing women. Blake's retreat was swift but dignified. He was too vain to run outright, but his haste spoke volumes about his fear of Noah's shotgun. Harper and Zoe followed, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, swallowed by the dying storm. Dr. Brooks lowered his weapon with a sigh. Well, that was exciting. Haven't pointed a gun at anyone in 15 years. Noah, Liam said, still reeling from the revelation, I never knew. There's a lot you don't know about the people in your congregation, my friend. Mrs. Henderson was a saloon girl in Tombstone before she married the banker. Young Timothy Fletcher's father was an outlaw who died in a shootout with marshals. Half the respectable families in this town have passed they'd rather forget. The doctor smiled warmly. That's what churches are for, giving people a place to start over, to become better than they were. Ava looked around the chapel there. Chapel now, she supposed, though Blake still held the mortgage. What happens now? Where will we go? Liam followed her gaze, taking in the familiar wooden pews, the altar where he'd found solace in his darkest hours, the stained glass windows that had filtered God's light into his grief-shadowed world. Then he looked at his wife, and felt a different kind of light warming his chest. I hear California's beautiful this time of year, he said softly. And I have a sister in Sacramento who's been begging me to visit for 20 years. She owns a small ranch. Nothing fancy, but enough to raise cattle, maybe start a family. A family, Ava repeated, wonder in her voice. If you'll have me, not as your protector or your priest, but as your husband, really and truly, for better or worse. She stepped closer, her hands finding his face, tracing the lines that grief and years had carved there. I thought I was running from one prison to another, she whispered. But this feels like freedom. Their second kiss was different from the first, deeper, more certain, full of promise rather than desperation. When they broke apart, the first, rays of dawn were slanting through the chapel windows, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Besides, Liam added with a smile that transformed his entire face, I hear there's always a need for good preachers on the frontier. And California doesn't require celibacy for their circuit riders. Dr. Brooks chuckled. Now that's what I call a happy ending. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the desert air clean and sweet with the scent of sage and new possibilities. Somewhere in the distance, a cactus flower was blooming, small and brief, but beautiful beyond measure in its moment of glory. If this tale of midnight courage and unexpected love stirred your heart, dear friends, share your thoughts below, and tell us where in this wide world you're watching from today, for love stories like this one belong to every corner of God's creation.